Welcome to the second part of our Week 2 material where we talk about stakeholders in public organizations. The good thing is, this lecture is going to be much shorter than the other one because the material is fairly straightforward and it takes you in a little bit of a technical direction that is really best done by reading. So I'm going to give a broad overview and let you dive into the materials a little more in depth on your own and then pose questions in the class notes. So a stakeholder, as our readings define it and as the literature defines it, takes on different meanings in different situations, but broadly means anyone who is affected by the outcomes or output of an organization, or maybe lack thereof, right? Lack of output, and so on. So as you can see, these definitions here, the Freeman definition, certainly encompasses that. The Bryson one kind of adds the idea that someone can place a claim on the organization's attention, drawing it from one maybe issue or concern to another. The idea here comes from the business literature that you have the power to direct the organization's future. That's one component of it. But the public aspect of what public sector work is all about means that there are people who are affected by the organization's actions or inactions no matter what. Stakeholder analysis in a for-profit institution is very different than it is in an institution that is governed by democratic norms and practices in addition to the bureaucratic structure and rules that accompany our day-to-day work. So we always have to remember that at the end of the day, what makes public sector work different is going to affect who our stakeholders are as well. We care about stakeholders, then, because we need them for a variety of reasons. One is when we are creating coalitions or networking to find solutions or connect community partners, that means that our stakeholders have to be engaged, have to buy into the work, and have to be willing to share the burden. We also need stakeholder support to ensure this long-term connectivity and viability of organizations. This is particularly true of nonprofit organizations who do not have to exist year after year, right? Governmental organizations have some added stability in the fact that most of them have to continue existing at some level or another. But the long-term viability of a nonprofit means that you need people to buy in to continue that nonprofit's mission. So you also need stakeholders then to enact policies, plans, and programs to ensure, one, that you're reaching the right people, two, that you have support in doing so, and three, that you're getting the appropriate feedback about what is going on with your work, right? You can't just produce something and expect it to work 100%. You need to ensure that your work actually does reach the people that it should reach. So organizations need to satisfy key stakeholders or risk failure, maybe total failure of the organization or at least widespread failure. So you need to enhance political feasibility with a public sector organization. You have to make it desirable for the elected officials to allocate resources to what you do in order to achieve the common good. And the elected officials, at the end of the day, are elected by the same constituents that you serve as well. So it is cyclical in nature. Also, you need to ensure that there is some procedural justice, that there is some sort of rationality in the organization that provides legitimacy, and only stakeholders can come in and kind of give you that guidance. So you can see this comes from the reading about what it is that stakeholder relationships do and how they interact with one another. And at the end of the day, as opposed to creating profit, what we're looking for is creating public value. And to take a step back from that, you have to understand both the mandates, what your organization must do, right, by law, and mission, what the organization does and why it does it, right? And with a governmental entity, there's that kind of added component of you have mandates of what you have to do, both in terms of legal reporting, but also in terms of actually providing a service. But you have to shape how that service is going to be provided, and that's where a mission and a vision comes in. So you need stakeholders to organize and rally participation in this, to create ideas and interventions, and to build coalitions around projects or policies that you want to see succeed. And so this kind of relates to what we're building up to at the end of the semester with strategic planning, but it is something that needs to be continuously done. And it's not just how are the solutions working, but it's also what are the problems that are out there on the ground. And having stakeholders means having people that can feed you that information so that you can work on policy solutions or just practical kind of bureaucratic solutions to the potential issues that might exist. So there are different types of stakeholder analysis methods or goals that might come into play here. And our first case study will deal with an issue of stakeholder analysis, or maybe an issue of stakeholder analysis that should have been done the first time around. But there are different types, and you might want to use the same tools in different situations. One is to organize participation around a kind of mission-driven initiative, right? Either it's a ballot initiative or it's a new policy. Certainly, kind of elections work in this way too, at a broader level, right? But just kind of organizing participation in the goal. And for nonprofits, that might be organizing just participation in terms of volunteers, board members, and so on. The second is how do you kind of create new ideas for strategic interventions? And that requires flow of information both in and out of the organization, and stakeholders can provide that conduit. The third, as opposed to kind of organizing a policy goal or set of goals or creating interventions, the third is kind of building a winning coalition. Once you have that proposal in place, what do you need? Who do you need out there in the community to ensure that that proposal moves forward, becomes enacted, and then gets implemented in the right ways? And then, of course, that leads to our last one, which is implementing, monitoring, and evaluating what you have done, right? Once you have enacted a policy, that's not the end, as we know. So how do you ensure that that gets done in a way that is consistent with the mission, consistent with the vision at the beginning of the policy's start of its life cycle? So our first case study involves the Seattle Fight for $15 minimum wage. And this was a big platform initiative of the mayor at the time. And the mayor was contemplating whether to keep, modify, or eliminate a committee that had been put together to work towards a raised minimum wage for Seattle. And as you will see in the materials, that initiative fell apart. And there were people that were part of the initiative that felt like they didn't have an adequate say in what was going on. And at the same time, there were people that felt like there were gaps in information and gaps in representation on this committee. So, for our purposes, we will be thinking about the following issue. So the mayor is contemplating whether, at this juncture, once you read the materials, to keep, modify, or eliminate the committee, right, that exists. You are an aide to the mayor, and you must create a detailed plan with some examples of how to map the stakeholders. So what I want you to do is go in and say, not here's who the stakeholders are and what they do, although you might do that in this process, right? But tell the mayor, okay, if we're taking a step back, right, how should we engage in a stakeholder analysis that gets us to a winning coalition, right? So you'll want to think about who's already at the table and whether they have helped in the initiative, given the materials. Have they hurt? What would those currently at the table think if they were no longer included? Would they become hostile to the overall goal? And would that be a problem for moving forward towards enactment? And then who has been missing from the discussion? Is it possible to develop ways in a quick turnaround time to include people that may have been excluded before? And I will tell you with respect to this specific problem, you will note that there was kind of a large working group and then a smaller working group. I want you to think about who should be in that core. So one of the things you can do is look at that wider group of people and who did not get included in the core the first time around. Now, that may have been self-selection out of wanting to do that work, but that doesn't mean that the mayor can't be tasked with saying, hey, we really need to get X, Y, and Z covered on this committee. Maybe a personal invitation to do the work might work a little bit better, okay? So that is the end of our time on the stakeholder and stakeholder analysis material. As I said, a lot of it's straightforward. What you'll be looking at is the World Wildlife Federation has a stakeholder analysis tool. There is the WHO stakeholder analysis material as well, in addition to the readings to kind of see how this is done, okay? And then make sure you read through the materials for case study 1. All right, that is all for now.